What are melodic Ciaccona's biggest pros and cons? That's what I'm here to tell you today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. To start, she is an absolutely excellent investment if you're really interested in Aero DPSs. This is because she has a very strong team core with Aero Rover, which forms the double Aero core. Stick this with basically any existing Aero DPS that we have in the game as of now, and you've got yourself quite a strong triple Aero team. The reason that this works is that, despite Ciaccona being an Aero Erosion character, and having her kit tailored towards negative status playstyles, she actually has some great generalist buffs that really help Aero characters on the whole. For example, 5-piece Gusts of Welkin is a free-to-play accessible set that you're able to put on her that provides Aero damage to the entire team, based on the fact that she can apply Aero Erosion herself. And if you want to go the extra kilometer, then you can also stick her on her signature weapon, which is able to reduce enemy Aero res, and that's a very strong quality of hers. Not to mention that Aero Rover being in the team means that your team is also going to experience even more Aero damage bonus thanks to Blood Pact Pledge, which is a free 5-star weapon. Also, adding on to that, he's able to provide attack through 5-piece Rejuvenating Glow. You're of course not limited to Gusts of Welkin, as you can put her on Moonlit Clouds as well, but generally, for your Aero teams, you're going to be sticking her on Gusts. So she generally ends up being fantastic for any Aero unit, because she has such good generalist buffs for them. She's obviously best in slot for Cardathea, because she is a character that really appreciates Aero Erosion as a negative status, and Ciaccona applies it in spades. However, even Gion, who previously mostly liked to use Mortefi, now currently has Ciaccona as his best in slot team. And even though Iguno is a secondary option that you can use with him, you're still able to use Ciaccona if you have her, and end up doing just fine. She's going to still be very strong, and still feel like she's making your Gion feel a whole lot more competent. And while this is on the more niche side, you can also consider using DPS Iguno with Ciaccona. Like I said, literally any Aero DPS is able to benefit from her, because her core with Aero Rover, a free unit with a free 5-star weapon, is really solid all around, so she ends up being one of the best characters that you can pick up if you're really interested in this particular element. And as Wuthering Waves has progressed, elements have only become more and more relevant, so having such a strong choice for one particular element absolutely has you covered, and if you just tend to main a lot of characters of Aero, well then she ends up being an even better investment for you. However, to say that Aero characters are the only ones that she helps would be absolutely incorrect, because she's also able to be a really good teammate for DPS Phoebe. That's right, if you're an Absolution Phoebe main, then in order to use her in Whimpering Wastes and have her feel comfortable there, you can use Ciaccona with her. This is because she's able to comfortably apply Spectral Frazzle in Multi-Wave, and Phoebe always wants Spectral Frazzle to be on the enemies in order to max out her damage output. So in that case, she is a fantastic pull if you're really bent on using the Acolyte as a main DPS. And of course, that makes sense. Her damage is really high, and she is a very competent DPS. But her main flaw is that Spectre Rover just doesn't really feel that good to use with her in Whimpering Wastes if you're using her as a DPS in particular. Obviously it's not a problem if you're using her as Confession Phoebe for Zani, but that's not playing her as a DPS. For the mains of Phoebe specifically, you Acolyte fans are really going to want to pick up Ciaccona, because she then unlocks Phoebe in basically every single game mode. She's also just more comfortable to use in Spectre Rover in general, arguably, so you can still use her in TOA, and it's going to feel absolutely excellent, and it just completely solves any multi-wave problems that Phoebe previously had. This has literally only continued to be the case since Ciaccona's release, and I still think that Phoebe holds up as one of the most valuable 5-star pulls in this game, so it's a very reasonable investment to make. And another really nice thing about this is that you don't have to use all of the Aero gear on Ciaccona and then just have it wasted on Phoebe. No, you can actually change around her build very accessibly, and then she's gonna end up doing quite nicely for her and provide her with plenty of buffs that are actually useful to the Acolyte. For example, you don't want to use Gusts of Welkin? Makes sense. Use Moonlit Clouds instead, and then you're able to give your Acolyte plenty of attack percent. Also, instead of using her signature weapon, you can actually save on that and just use Static Mist instead. Sure, it does mean that you'll do less personal damage, however, you're buffing up your Phoebe even more. So if you're really big on playing Hypercarry Phoebe, I absolutely recommend that you pull for Ciaccona. She is a fantastic investment for your case. I genuinely don't think they're going to make a more comfortable teammate for her. And I will say that Phoebe does have many team options, so you don't need Ciaccona in particular, but the reason why I recommend her so heavily is because I just personally think she plays so much better than Spectre Rover, and that aside, I feel like unlocking an entirely new game mode for a character to play in is quite significant, especially if you're somebody that likes to use Phoebe against basically all content. Genuinely would recommend. Otherwise, I should also bring up how Ciaccona is able to do her own personal damage. It's obviously nothing crazy compared to what the main carry is doing, but it's honestly significant enough to the point where it is actually helping out the main DPS. she is making her own reasonable contributions. The Aero erosions themselves are actually doing quite nice damage. And even putting that aside, she still has a rotation in which she does some of her own crit damage. So honestly, you're able to get a bit of sub DPS out of her, a surprising amount actually. It's obviously nothing groundbreaking, but it is enough to the point where I do consider it to be a relevant point. It's especially helpful in Gion teams, because while he is a good DPS, his hypercarry damage is falling off nowadays, so getting additional sub DPS help does actually really help out his teams. Especially considering that game modes such as Whimpering Wastes are experiencing quite high HP inflation. Another positive that I want to bring up regarding this lovely bard is that she's free-to-play friendly. What I mean by this is that you're easily able to stick her on a static mist, and that's able to support most of her teams. The one team where this doesn't work is Cardathea teams, because that character is HP scaling, but for all of her other relevant teams, you can give her that weapon, and she's going to do just fine. You don't really need to invest a whole lot into her in order to have your Ciaccona hit the ground running. She's easily going to be able to support your characters from moment one. I will say that it's a bit unfortunate that she doesn't really have a good weapon option on the level of Static Mist to support Cardathea teams outside of her signature weapon. I do want to say that that is a bit of a shame, but otherwise, you're easily able to put that permanently available standard weapon on her, and she's able to help out your account very nicely in terms of Aero characters and Phoebe. This is especially relevant when you consider that most characters in this game are attack scaling. I do think that this could change going into the future, but for at least the majority of irrelevant synergies, yes. She is able to help them out with Static Mist, and the reason why I'm putting so much emphasis on this is because Wuthering Waves characters really do want their signature weapons. It is a common knowledge fact at this point that every character gains like 20 to 40% extra performance, if not more sometimes, from pulling their dedicated weapon because of the guaranteed weapon banner. Every unit is heavily balanced around their sig, some more than others, some less than others, and Ciaccona is a nice case where you don't really have to adhere to that. This is especially nice when you consider that her own signature is somewhat niche. You're only really pulling it for Aero characters, and if you're a free-to-play, it's not really the first investment that I would recommend that you make. It is really niche, and something that you would only really get if you're super duper big on Aero characters. It's a great weapon, obviously, it has its value, but it's not really a priority pull. Now, I should say, it's a big shame that her best in slot synergy with Cardathea, you can't really pull this off, and that is unfortunate because then you just kind of have to use whatever gun you've got on hand. But she does end up being partially free-to-play friendly in that sense. I will say that this point definitely diminishes if you're a Cardathea main looking to play her with Cardathea, but otherwise, you're in the clear and you can stick her on that and get by just fine. And also, her sequences just aren't really all that great, but we'll get into that a little later. However, as amazing as this lovely Renacetum bard is, we do still have to discuss her flaws. One of those being that she is quite a niche investment. What I mean by this is that when you pull for her, you are very much pulling a support that helps particularly Aero teams and Absolution Phoebe. If you're not getting her for those particular purposes, then she's not really going to do anything on your account. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with pulling for niche units, but the thing is, there are alternative options for basically every character that she plays with. Yes, even Cardathea. If you're good enough at Quick Swap, you can substitute Changli in for her and get by just fine, if not do quite well, honestly. Now granted, if you're a casual, then Ciaccona is a really good pull for your Carda, because honestly, Quick Swap Carda is hard to play. Though that just naturally comes with the territory of playing Quick Swap teams in general. But either way, you get the idea. She's very niche, and if you're a free-to-play in particular, I can't actually recommend Ciaccona as a priority pull, because obviously your resources are limited, and I feel like investing into this type of character, that's something that you should only do if you're a Gion and Ciaccona main specifically, and even then you have a Uno as another option for your Gion. With Phoebe, it depends on how dedicated you are to her. You don't have to use her in Whimpering Wastes. She's not exactly one of the strongest characters that you can use there. She's good if you have Ciaccona, but you have other options to be honest. You can easily use Forlova and completely mow down the game mode, use Changli teams, Triple Fusion if you have it, Zani teams, or you can just use her in her Confession state, and so on and so forth. You have plenty of other options. You're not really barred down to one. So while unlocking her Whimpering Waste potential would be nice, you can easily get by using Spectra Rover and pretty much any other second slot teammate to buff up Phoebe herself. And shoot, you can just stick with her free-to-play friendly team of herself, Sanhua, and Spectra Rover, and continue to clear TOA with no problems whatsoever. So in that case, unless you're a really big Phoebe fan, it's not a necessity. It's amazing, I will say if you're really dedicated to main DPS Phoebe, you should pull her. It's a very nice upgrade, but to say that it's a necessity would just be wrong. So while Ciaccona is definitely high value in the areas in which she works, to say that she's some amazing must-pull just wouldn't exactly be true. The more limited your resources are, the less that I would recommend her, unless you're really big on maining Carda and such. Now, With that being said, she's amazing in her niche, and not every character has to be this crazy flexible unit, but it is something to draw attention to. I'd say that if you're a low spender, and you're a big Aero fan, she becomes more valuable, because low spenders are able to get more limited 5-star characters on average, and I would say that for a more niche unit, Ciaccona honestly offers quite a complete package. Another issue that I have with her is that her sequences just aren't really worth getting. Yes, her S2 is good, it provides Aero damage bonus, but that's honestly so niche. You would rather get Shorekeeper's S2, which can benefit every attack scaler on your account. You would only really get this if you're like an S6 Cardathea main, and you're looking for the best way to continue investing into her. Otherwise, I can't really see any reason as to why you would invest into those. Sure, they're fine enough sequences, but her S1 is just for her own personal damage, and while her S2 is great for Aero characters, it does nothing for Phoebe mains. And to be honest, it's just not worth it in relation to other character S2s. I personally think that Yuno's S2, for example, a character that's going to be running alongside her, has a much better S2 that's able to be used with a wider array of characters. A similar array to Ciaccona, actually. So, with that in mind, it's hard to recommend continuing to invest in her outside of her signature weapon if you're really big on Aero characters. Sure, it's a fine enough investment, but I just feel like there are so much better sequences that you could get, and generally speaking, you would rather get DPS sequences, because those tend to be tuned up very, very high. Now, with all that being said, I do think that Ciaccona is a great unit at the end of the day. She 100% achieves what she set out to do, and it's nice that despite being a negative status support, she isn't only used for negative status-based teams. And this is nice. She's honestly aged quite nicely, and it's cool that she's going to be able to work with DPS Yuno. A cool unit all around. How about yourself? Are you going to be pulling? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hopefully this video is able to tell you Ciaccona's biggest pros and cons. This has been Juiced, signing out. And if one thing's always remained the same, is that her song is always a really fun time.